No one can keep a secret forever. Joe and Diane Pikul led a life of privilege, but darker shadows lay just under the surface.
Started out great, but the people who knew him, it wasn't so good.
Behind closed doors, a shocking secret would tear their beautiful world apart.
People who feel humiliation or shame surrounding how they live their lives can go to great lengths to conceal that.
It would stun everyone who knew them.
As the secret becomes more embarrassing, the only alternative in their minds is to kill somebody.
You just can't hide some dirty little secrets. By all outward appearances, Diane and Joe Pikul have a life that seems just about perfect. Diane's a stay-at-home mom with 2 beautiful young children, while Joe is a successful stock trader at the top of his game.
Joe Pikul himself was a financial analyst, a high roller on Wall Street. They had 2 beautiful, lovely children, a boy and a girl. All-American family.
Making money was something that Joe Pikul was really good at. And it was something that gave him prestige and gave him power and gave him authority.
The Pikuls' wealth lets them enjoy all the best of New York City. They live in a charming Greenwich Village apartment and have a beach house in the glamorous Hamptons. Not having to work allows Diane time for decorating, socializing, and pursuing her artistic interests.
I think it looked pretty glamorous from the outside. They had a lifestyle that probably a lot of people might have looked at and said, oh, you know, they've made it.
But after 8 years of marriage, there are problems between Diane and Joe that money just can't solve.
Appeared to have everything to the innocent bystander who didn't know him. They say, wow, what a couple. But the people who knew him, it wasn't so good. They fought constantly, and it was usually over the children.
Diane and Joe have both wrestled with their own troubles in the past. In fact, they met in Alcoholics Anonymous, struggling to overcome their addictions. Joe's known for having a vicious temper, and years before, Diane's first husband once saw what she could be capable of in her darkest moments.
He awakened and she was drunk and she was sitting there with a knife.
But Diane has been sober for more than 10 years. She's worked hard to put those demons behind her. And she's turned her most intense feelings towards a new passion: writing. Her devotion to her new work is just beginning to reap some rewards. Diane is accepted into a prestigious writer's workshop and lands a position at Harper's, a literary magazine. She's feeling stronger and more confident than ever.
I think that she started developing as a person. I think she started becoming independent enough that she felt she could stand on her own 2 feet without having Joe Pikul lead her around.
But Joe is convinced there is more to Diane's positive outlook than a new job.
He believes she's having an affair because he's found condoms in their bedroom that didn't belong to him.
He places a tap on their home phone lines, hoping to uncover the truth about his wife's secret life.
If the other person feels that sense of distance, if they feel like things don't add up and they want things to make sense.
Not at all.
The drive to want to uncover and understand and find out what's going on, even if it means revealing the secrets, can be enormous.
I've never met anyone like this. He makes me feel like I did before I met Joe.
Joe never finds out who Diane is talking to, but the marriage is failing. It seems certain that Joe and Diane are headed towards divorce.
They were going separate ways no matter what. The only thing that even made them talk to each other, the only thing that kept them together were the children. And that wasn't necessarily a positive, because all they did was fought about it.
Joe, I deserve to be happy.
But before Joe moves on, he wants Diane to come clean about her secrets. Joe asks Diane to come to their Hamptons home on a Friday night so they can talk. He's actually intent on confronting her.
Are you having an affair, Diane? Because if you're cheating on me, you are going to regret it.
It's a furious fight.
I found condoms upstairs.
Joe confronts Diane about the condoms he says he found in the bedroom, and he lashes out at her for carrying on with a lover while their children were home and in the next room.
He threatened to go to court and take the children away from her because she was an unfit mother having sex with someone in their Hampton place.
According to Joe, the fight finally ends when Diane storms out of the house. In fact, he doesn't see her for the rest of the weekend. But on Monday morning, when Diane would normally be going to the job she loves, something very, very disturbing happens. Diane Pikul fails to arrive at work. For those who know Diane, this is totally out of character. Diane is always on time and always calls in if she's going to be late.
She may have had a lot of emotional storminess, but Diane was a planner, and she was somebody who said she was going to be somewhere, she'd be there.
Her co-workers become concerned and call Joe. He tells them she left the Hamptons' house. He says she probably spent the weekend with her new boyfriend. At 7 p.m., Joe calls police and reports Diane missing. Detective Bill Glynn lands Diane Pikul's case.
Joe Pikul calls my office, wanted to speak to me. And when I got on the phone, he had said, I was given your name by people at Harper's Magazine where my wife works. He said, they were overreacting. He said, I had an argument with my wife, and she left the house. I said, well, I understand that, Joe. I said, that happens. I mean, it's not that unusual.
Bill Glynn has been a New York cop for 14 years, and during that time, he's learned something crucial about missing persons cases. Most people are exactly where they want to be, and they turn up whenever they want to.
I see it all the time. It's very common for people to go off, whether they get drunk or they have a boyfriend or girlfriend. Naturally, the spouse is very concerned, and they come in and want to make the report, and then the individuals show up.
Detective Glynn is fairly certain that this is what has happened in Diane Pikul's case. But still, he tells Joe he will stop by the house to get more details.
So I said, Joe, you know what I'll do? I'll come over to the house. Let me get all the information I can from you, and we'll be able to make an official missing persons report just to cover everybody. And he said, that's fine.
Diane Pikul's disappearance looks a lot like a case of temporary domestic drama. But then, Detective Glynn gets another phone call only minutes after speaking with Joe. It's from Newburgh, New York, about 70 miles away, and it makes him take notice.
I'm at my desk, and one of the detectives in my office shouts out, does anyone know anything about a Pikul? I said, yeah, I know. I just got off the phone with this guy, Joe Pikul.
Detective Glynn has no idea his missing persons case is about to take one of the strangest turns he's ever seen. With someone's dirty little secret at its core.
And that was one of the things that set things off in my head, that I said, there's something wrong here.
Diane Pikul is a wife and mother known by all her friends as loving, caring, and most of all, responsible. So when she doesn't arrive for work on Monday morning, her husband Joe eventually calls the police. Joe Pikul explains to NYPD Detective Bill Glynn that he believes Diane ran away with her new boyfriend after a fight in their Hamptons summer home.
He said we had an argument, there was a lot of screaming and yelling, and she walked out the door.
But immediately after Glynn takes the missing persons report, he gets a call from a police department 70 miles away from New York City that is strangely connected to the case.
One of the detectives in my office shouts out, "I got the Newburgh Police Department on the phone. They're asking about Joe Pikul." I said, "Well, swing that call over to me."
Newburgh, New York is a quiet town on the Hudson River about an hour north of New York City. A local gas station owner has found a wallet and a suitcase full of lingerie in his dumpster. The credit cards inside have Joe and Diane Pikul's names on them. And on closer inspection, the contents of the suitcase raise even more questions.
What bothered me was after I had gotten all the pedigree on Diane Pikul, the clothing just did not match her physical makeup. Everything was very large. Just didn't make sense.
Why would Diane Pikul throw away a suitcase full of lingerie and credit cards? Has she decided to end her marriage and start a new life? Is there another woman in Joe's life that these sexy undergarments belong to? Or do they belong to Diane? And why would someone go so far out of the way to hide them? At 11 p.m. that night, Detective Bill Glynn arrives at Joe's apartment to interview him in person about Diane's disappearance.
40% of the time, I'd say people that have come in and reported their spouse missing, their spouse is usually having an affair or where they want to be. At that point, I really felt that it was just a family dispute, and I would go see what he had to say.
When's the last time you saw her?
Saw her Friday night. We had a fight.
And Joe admits their fighting that night got fierce. He tells Detective Glynn about the condom he found and that a divorce was probably on the horizon.
I will take everything. You will have nothing. Zero.
He said, I knew for sure she was having an affair with somebody at that point, and I confronted her.
I believe that she's run off with someone. I think she's having an affair.
Detective Glynn has heard this tale of domestic infidelity told dozens of times. Now he's just heard it again.
When I was at Joe Pikul's house and I'm listening to the story, I'm saying it's feasible. It's possible that she does have a boyfriend. You know, their marriage was on the rocks. I mean, they were breaking up the estate out there. They were going to share the property, and both were going to go on with their own lives.
This was a marriage on the brink of divorce. And as we know, divorced couples frequently live these separate lives. They may be living under the same roof, but they're actually living separate lives. They do their own things. There's a great deal of independence. And Joe explains to the police that it just simply wasn't alarming to him that she was missing because they were going through a divorce and they did their own things.
But when Detective Glynn asks Joe why Diane's suitcase full of lingerie would appear at a gas station 70 miles away from the city, he has no explanation. Detective Glynn leaves the apartment at 1 a.m., feeling that something is not quite right about the story he's just heard.
Married couples having affairs is not a rare thing. It happens. It just happens, and you have to accept that. But there was something about Joe that just put antennas up. I said, there's more to this. And I said, we have to find Diane Pikul.
But where could Diane be? There is no physical evidence to suggest a crime has occurred. Still, Diane's friends and colleagues are becoming more frantic. As the hours tick by, their fears grow worse. And so do Detective Glynn's.
I'm getting a strong feeling that something happened to Diane Pikul. And the more I spoke to the people, the more convinced I was, because they insisted she would never, ever leave those kids.
But investigators find themselves at a loss. They have no clues as to why and how Diane Pikul disappeared, except a mysterious suitcase full of lingerie found miles away from the city. Could it possibly hold the secret to what happened to Diane?
Keeping a secret, especially keeping a big secret, is a heavy load. It's a heavy, heavy burden.
Police are about to discover that Diane Pikul's disappearance is tied to something much darker and stranger than a new love affair. Because the Pikuls had a secret that would have ruined them if it ever got out.
He was offering information, and if individual talks, we just let him keep talking.
Just off the New York State Thruway, Newburgh, New York is far from the chaos of Manhattan. It's a quiet town set among the Adirondack Mountains. Police have recovered a suitcase and wallet here belonging to missing person Diane Pikul. And on October 28, 1987, they make another discovery nearby that is truly horrifying.
I guess it was a highway worker up in Newburgh, New York, found a female body on the side of the road.
The body is tightly bound and wrapped in a tarp and has been brazenly discarded by the side of the busy highway. New York State Police arrive and unwrap the corpse from its plastic shroud. It's the body of a white female. Small build, 30s or 40s. The corpse fits the description of Diane Pikul. The clothing matches what she was last known to be wearing. Her friends and family's worst fears are realized when the identity of the body is confirmed. This is Diane Pikul. And it's clear that she's been murdered.
The fact that the body was wrapped up in a tarp, there was rope around the body, had been in that ditch, it was obviously a body that had been the victim of a homicide.
The pathologist in that case examined the body, and I believe he testified that Diane Pikul was beaten about the head and that she was also strangled. He gave a dual cause of death as blunt force trauma and strangulation.
There is no solid physical evidence at the crime scene that can help police. Diane Pikul's body does not yield any blood, hair, or DNA that could identify her killer. But a husband or lover is always the first suspect in a woman's murder.
Police and law enforcement, they realize that in cases like these, where someone is not living a inherently risky life, the most likely suspect is going to be someone close to the victim. And the officers are going to immediately focus on a spouse.
Police attempt to contact Joe and tell him they've located Diane's body, but no one can find him. Joe immediately becomes the prime suspect. But because he's always insisted Diane was cheating on him, police must consider the possibility that Diane was murdered after a new relationship went horribly wrong.
I think when people have affairs and then they turn up missing, I think it, to a certain extent, complicates the investigation because there's a lot of possibilities that can enter into it. The lover, or whoever it may be, may have done something inappropriate to this person, and the spouse had nothing to do with it. So there's a lot of possibilities that always enter into, I think, an investigator's mind.
But friends and family are telling police a very different story. They insist Diane wasn't cheating on Joe.
You want to find relatives, anybody that can tell you anything about Diane Pikul. They were very emphatic that there was no way that Diane would leave those kids. And there's no way that she had any sort of boyfriend.
Police can't find any trail of phone calls, letters, or even one eyewitness to substantiate Joe's claim that Diane was seeing someone else. It all leads Detective Glynn to reach a very different conclusion about Diane Pikul.
I felt that she definitely didn't have a boyfriend. She was too involved in everything. And I had also gotten a call from their babysitters. They were very concerned about Diane, and they were saying something's happened to her.
Right from the beginning, Joe has been giving police conflicting statements about his and Diane's last fight in the Hamptons.
Pikul gave 2 or 3 different stories on what happened out in Amagansett, Long Island.
In one version, Joe claims Diane stormed out of the house immediately after the argument. But in another, he says he went to bed and Diane was just gone the next morning.
So as this investigation goes on, the police begin to realize that 2 + 2 does not equal 4 in this case, and they start to press him.
The stories aren't adding up, and Joe's nowhere to be found. Joe quickly becomes the prime suspect in Diane's murder. But while Joe may have had reasons to want Diane out of his life, would he have really risked everything to kill her?
Someone who has so much to lose, someone with a lot of money, privilege, no prior criminal history, it just doesn't make sense. What would be in it for Joe to kill his wife?
Police finally track down Joe and bring him in for more questions. But this time, the investigators use a different strategy. Officer Joe Tripotto draws Pikul out by becoming more of a confidant than interrogator.
I gave him a bite to eat, have something to drink, and we became having to a point where we're having family conversations. He asked me a couple of personal questions, as much as like where I was from, and I told him that I had recently been in New York City, where occasionally I stayed at a condominium on 57th Street. Coincidentally, he specifically knew that condominium and said that he had a female friend that lived in that same condo.
Joe starts to relax. With someone there to listen, he begins to open up about how he really feels about Diane.
Joe tried to depict Diane to be this philandering woman who never took care of him and never bothered to do anything to make him happy whatsoever.
Once Joe starts to talk about how badly Diane made him feel, he just can't stop.
When he had told me that his wife had never given him any support, there came a time in the conversation shortly thereafter where he started crying.
Finally, a very emotional Joe breaks down completely. The conflicting stories and fictitious boyfriends fall away, and the truth comes out.
He said that she was an evil and malicious person, and I don't care if you guys give me 10 or 20 years. I think everybody's better off without her.
Amazingly, Joe fully confesses to police that he strangled his wife in a fit of rage.
He explained he was with her early Saturday morning.
For my happiness, you know what, so be it.
They had gotten into an argument, and he physically showed how he had choked her.
Joe Pikul has finally revealed a terrible secret. He says he killed his wife Diane with his own hands. But police have no idea they're about to get a first-hand look at another one of Joe Pikul's secrets. The absolutely stunning reason why he wanted Diane dead. What did Diane Pikul do or say that pushed Joe into a murderous rage?
If the stakes are really, really high, sometimes people will find themselves doing things that they never expected that they would do.
After days of lying and deceit, Joe Pikul finally breaks down and confesses he killed his wife Diane. But that's not the only secret that the Wall Street banker has been desperate to keep. When Joe is arrested, he pleads with police to let him undress in one of the bathrooms.
Couldn't I just, go to the bathroom? Let's go, sunshine. Come on, be close.
His request is denied.
When Joe Pikul was arrested by the state police, Part of the general procedure was to strip search him and make sure he had no weapons, and they found that he was wearing a woman's bra and pantyhose.
It was obviously a surprise to the investigators at the barracks that this, Wall Street financer, a big high roller there, was dressed in a woman apparel.
The last thing police could have imagined, Joe Pikul is actually a transvestite. It's a shocking and confusing discovery.
A lot of people confuse drag queens or transsexuals with transvestites. A transvestite tends to be a heterosexual man who has a fetish about women's clothing. It's something that is used for sexual excitement.
For years, Joe Pikul has been hiding his sexuality inside a private fantasy world.
This is something that is all-encompassing in terms of someone's internal world when they have this sexual fetish. And if it couldn't be accepted at home, he had to find a way to put it in a compartment.
But Joe's desire to dress in women's clothing is so powerful, he indulges even though he's a suspect in his wife's murder.
He needed to have the women's clothing. He needed to wear the women's clothing. This was something that he was probably preoccupied with every day, just about all day, thinking about clothing, descriptions of clothing, looking at it, imagining it, wearing it, because the anxiety and distress of not participating in this would have been unbearable for him.
But dressing up in women's clothing so he can fulfill his deepest sexual needs is a secret Joe believes he must keep at all costs.
Our sexual template is generally unconscious. It is fixed. It's not really changeable. We kind of like what we like. And we don't really choose what that is. And so it has the potential to expose us in a very, very deep way.
In fact, Joe Pikul knows his career on Wall Street and his stable home life will be destroyed if his sexual secrets are discovered.
I think if Joe's cross-dressing came out in public, it's like a pimple at the end of your nose. He'll think everybody's looking.
If it's taboo, all the more reason to want to keep that private. If this secret got out, the humiliation that he would feel and the losses that he would feel, unimaginable.
To hide his secret, Joe has been renting his own apartment in Lower Manhattan without Diane's knowledge. It is his sanctuary away from the world's prying eyes, and the only place he can totally indulge his fetish.
It's something that really needs to be there in order for them to feel sexually excited. There are parts of him that have wishes to be a woman, a beautiful woman.
But the question remains, what did Diane know about her husband's sexual desires? A story emerges from interviews with Diane's friends about how she pieced together Joe's double life. A year and a half before her murder, Diane Pikul made a shocking discovery in the attic.
He prohibits his children and his wife from going into it. But one day, Diane decides to go into this attic. And whether it's because he left the door open or because she just couldn't help her curiosity, we will never know.
Diane pulls down the stairs to the attic space and climbs up the ladder. She uncovers a suitcase filled with her lingerie. But that's not all.
Diane found a number of Polaroids of Joe dressed in various bras and panties and a wedding dress.
The most startling find in this treasure trove of lingerie and sexual fetish material is a videotape.
Diane plays the videotape, and it's worse than she could have even imagined.
in which she sees her husband, Joe. He's dressed in her wedding gown, and he's masturbating. And he has the song, "Here Comes the Bride," playing in the background. And we could only imagine her horror at finding that her husband is leading this secret life under her nose.
I don't think she ever saw anything about him that would have led her to conclude this until she was confronted with the undeniable evidence.
As Diane watches the tape, the full extent of her husband's secret becomes more clear. She realizes Joe sometimes actually becomes an entirely different person. He no longer just dresses like a woman. He believes he is one.
He had an alternate ego or alternate identity of Chloe, I think her name was. There were some movies of him as Chloe.
Such a beautiful bride.
He has to create this alter ego because Joe can't be cross-dressing. The Wall Street millionaire, it's his alter ego, Chloe. And he has to create this alter ego in order to arouse himself. And there must be so much shame and humiliation surrounding it, but it's a compulsion. He can't help himself.
It's part of a very deep psychological template, even if it causes tremendous pain or embarrassment and effort to keep it separate from the rest of life.
Joe's mind won't consciously allow him to experience his true desires. He may have developed a psychiatric condition known as multiple personality disorder.
I think that when things cause a great deal of anxiety or when there is a great deal of trauma, splitting things apart tends to happen. So he wasn't able to integrate himself as a person who had these different facets or aspects of him, but was still him inside. Some of the needier, emotional parts of him that he didn't feel there was room for in his regular Joe identity. So they got split off.
What secret?
Joe, I know about you.
Eventually, Diane confronts Joe about his cross-dressing
I know your secret.
and tells him she found the photos and video. Once the couple decides to divorce, she turns over an envelope with the tapes and photos to attorney Raoul Felder, but doesn't tell him what's inside. She plans on using the evidence only if she needs it as leverage.
Many times in divorce cases, somebody will give you ammunition and they'll say, please don't open it. To say she had a weapon and not convince to use it is a fair appraisal of what went on. I don't think she wanted to use it at all.
Diane may have felt that despite her disgust, there was too much for her to lose from a public exposure.
What she was finding was unimaginable stigma. And I imagine she was horrified when she found that. When there's a sense of dread about a secret, when there's a sense that finding out whatever it is so bad that life as we know it would change if the secret were revealed.
As the couple heads towards divorce, Joe realizes his entire world is on the brink of destruction. Diane holds all the power in this situation. If she wants to, she can make his secret public, ruin his image, and take his children from him.
Joe's whole life revolved around his children. Prior to the incident, he was always afraid that he was going to lose his children to them, to her, Diane. He knew that in New York State there was basically a favoritism towards the mother, and he thought he was the better parent. And that was a bone of contention.
Diane had told him if he attempts to get custody of the kids, she's gonna expose him as a cross-dresser and get custody of the kids, and she will ruin his career. So Joe was apparently very concerned about both.
These dual threats prey upon Joe's mind, and more he feels as if he needs to do something, anything, to get some control back. According to investigators, he asks Diane to their house in the Hamptons, saying he wants to work out more details of their upcoming divorce. Tensions are already high between the two. They argue, and Diane threatens to reveal all she knows about Joe's dirty little secret.
I think as the secret becomes more hurtful, more embarrassing, I think that the people tend to take more drastic means. As a result, the only alternative in their minds is to silence the speaker, kill somebody to make sure that the secret never comes out.
Investigators believe Joe was being truthful when he confessed to Diane's murder. In a blind rage, Joe grabs a heavy object, hits Diane, and then strangles her to death. He wraps her body in a tarp and places it in his car, where it sits for 2 days before he moves to dispose of it upstate.
That's at the point where he decided he's got to get rid of this body. So all he does is throw the body off the side of the road.
Diane's body isn't the only evidence Joe now needs to dispose of. He throws away the suitcase of his oversized lingerie in a gas station dumpster. Eventually, the wallet inside leads police back to Joe Pikul.
I don't think it was a well-planned-out homicide. They go into survival mode. People in general, and in the homicides I've worked over the years, they see the worst happening to them. And he totally panicked. He totally panicked.
Joe Pikul is about to go on trial for the murder of his wife, Diane. The police believe they have a strong case against him. They have his confession and proof of his motive. But there's the whole truth, and there's courts of law. And sometimes secrets get to stay hidden.
There was a lot of additional information that we wanted to get in front of the jury, and the judge wouldn't allow it.
Joe Pikul has committed murder to keep his secret life as a crossdresser from coming out. But he has one more secret.
He took a mother from her children, and he destroyed a lot of people's lives.
Joe Pikul is about to go on trial and face his darkest fear. His sexual secrets on display for the world to see. Prosecutors contend he believed his wife was planning to expose his cross-dressing fetish. And murder was the only way to prevent his dirty little secret from getting out.
I think blackmail can be a strong motivation for somebody to commit murder. His entire life and this facade of who he was would potentially come to light.
But the defense gets a huge break. Joe's private demons will never be exposed inside the courtroom. The judge believes any evidence or mention of Joe's cross-dressing would prejudice the jury and focus them away from the facts of the murder.
Of course, I was very pleased when the cross-dressing didn't come in. If this jury heard that he was a cross-dresser, they might not pay attention to the evidence. They would convict him just because of that.
Not only that, the judge also rules that Joe's murder confession was illegally coerced by police.
The prosecution is delivered a huge blow, saying, guess what, you cannot use this because you have violated this man's constitutional rights in obtaining that confession.
With Joe's confession thrown out, the defense team believes their best strategy is to convince the jury of one thing, that it was entirely possible Joe did not commit the crime.
It was a circumstantial case. We had a legitimate shot with a reasonable doubt defense. Who done it? You know, you can't be sure this fella did it. Here's a reason for a doubt, and here's another reason for a doubt.
But then, Joe derails his attorney's plan. He wants to tell the jury Diane came at him with a knife and that he killed her in self-defense. But Joe's attorney thinks it's a huge mistake. If he claims self-defense, the confession that the judge ruled was coerced would now be admissible in court.
Defendant says, I did it. Well, a jury's entitled to hear that the defendant admitted in his own words that he committed the crime.
The defense team gives in and coaches Joe on a self-defense plea. But Joe's mental state is far from solid at this point, and weeks of preparation fall apart on the morning he takes the stand.
Joe Pikul was a different person every day of the week. You never knew what you were going to get from him. He had drank a whole bottle of vodka before he was supposed to testify. The judge gave me an hour and a jug of coffee and said, sober him up. I'm not giving you a continuance.
Joe unravels on the stand. He tells different versions of his story and even lets slip his other personalities, occasionally saying "we" during his testimony.
Joe Pikul would have been better proceeding with a mental illness defense than a self-defense. I don't know.
Joe's bizarre performance on the stand shows him in the worst possible light. The jury doesn't buy his story and finds him guilty of second-degree murder.
I was happy for Diane Pikul. I was happy for her children. I was happy for her family that the jury came back with, in our view, the proper verdict that Joe Pikul murdered Diane Pikul and that ultimately justice would be served.
But Joe has one last secret. He's been suffering from AIDS for years. While many transvestites are fully heterosexual, it's believed Joe contracted the virus from a tryst with another man. The disease is so advanced that Joe dies in prison a few months after his conviction.
And I think that by Joe Pikul dying of AIDS, not only did he cheat justice, but he basically didn't get the punishment that he deserved. I think that part of the punishment for a crime such as the one he committed, part of that punishment should be that he think about what he did for the rest of his life.
But perhaps cheating justice was all a part of Joe's plan.
Do I think that he killed Diane because he knew he was going to die of AIDS and he didn't want her raising his children? Maybe. He never admitted it to me, but maybe.
It's impossible to know all of what went on in Joe Pikul's troubled mind, but the secrets he kept locked away for years ruled his life and eventually cost Diane hers.
You never know about people, and certainly you never know about their private lives. The tame husband and wife may be sex maniacs or whips and chains and all this business, so you never really do know. But they were able to contain it. People like that to contain it. It could not be contained in the Pikul case.
Diane Pikul did all she could to escape Joe's inner demons, but in the end, his dirty little secret was too powerful to overcome.
She was a loving mother. She was a good parent, concerned about her children, and Joe Pikul snuffed her life out.
Someone who has a secret that they feel must not be revealed can become incredibly dangerous if that's threatened. And I think in the case of Diane Pikul, she really underestimated the level of danger that she was in. I don't think she really let herself fully take in just how dangerous the situation was.